Hi, everyone. Stephanie, did you want to briefly go over the regenerative agriculture panel? I
Sure, I
was,
can share briefly on that. So last month in our meeting, we had our quarterly climate career connections. I focused on regenerative agriculture, and I think what I really most enjoyed was that the panelists. This is weird because I recruited the panelists. One was a postdoc researcher, one was a farmer herself, and another one was a farming policy expert and analyst. And I just really liked how they all had such different perspectives on what it meant to really farm regeneratively and what kind of opportunity there was. And it was also informed by like their different ways of addressing the problem. So I think it was just a good reminder that everybody has something to contribute. And because of that, we also all have a different perspective on what are the best ways to go about it.
yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I would have said something, but I was not able to make that last call. But thank you, Stephanie, for giving us the rundown of what happened. And yeah, without further ado, I hand the microphone over to Mr. Larry Linenschmidt of the Hill Country Institute. He regularly testifies before Texas Congress on matters of creation care and the importance of finding climate change solutions in the state of Texas and nationally. Please connect me if I'm wrong.
Well, that was good. I like that. I testify, and I'm not sure how much we accomplish, but I like to look at the long arc. Like Martin Luther King Jr. said, that the arc of history goes towards justice, and I think that will happen even in Texas in environmental issues. So I want to thank you for your interest in the topic tonight. I'm very encouraged to see all of you. My word for the year would be hope, and you give me hope. So thank you for being here tonight. Talking about evangelical Christians and climate change. I really wish I had two or three things I could say, and you just say those and like wave a magic wand and that'd be it. But it's not that simple. This is a very complicated topic, and it covers a lot of different things. So I'm going to give you an overview. And my email is very simple, larrylinenschmidt@gmail.com. And if you email me after this presentation, I'll be glad to share information with you. I may not get to you immediately, but I will get to you. So don't hesitate to be in touch. And again, thank you. One other thing I always like to say, you can tell I'm a baby boomer. I'm not in college these days. I'm still learning, active learner. But as a baby boomer, I want to apologize for the mess that we've made and that unfortunately you have to clean up. So I'm looking forward to seeing you do that. So just to jump in. So what is an evangelical Christian? I think that's probably something that's on a lot of people's minds because they're in the news and politics are part of it. But evangelical Christians look at a personal relationship with Jesus as a Son of God as a foundation of our faith. The Bible we see is inspired by God, a three-person God, the Holy Spirit, inspired the Bible, and so we can rely on it. And so all of our life is to be based on what we get from the Word of God, and that includes how we think about our relationship with God. It's how we think about our art, our culture, and creation care. And creation care is a Christian term that includes climate change, but it's broader than climate change. So anything dealing with pollution, how we farm, regenerative farming, and other issues, that's all part of creation care. And that's kind of the umbrella term for Christians thinking about climate change and other issues. So when you think of identities today, we all have tribes, and people want to identify with the tribe because it gives them an identity, it gives them a secure feeling, a safe feeling, and they want to belong. So evangelical Christians, that I think can be considered a tribe in this context. In the past was really identified with the biblical view that I was explained a little bit, but also with maybe what I'd call traditional conservatism, Ronald Reagan type of conservatism, social conservatism, preserving life, a strong military, and fiscal responsibility, meaning a balanced budget. But also Reagan was very clear about national and state government's responsibility for caring for the environment. Now, the predominant view today within evangelical world is more of a right-wing populist view. And unfortunately, on climate science, it's pretty much anti-science. You've probably heard climate science is a Chinese hoax. That would be, unfortunately, an often rendered view within the evangelical world. Even though the Bible is considered the rule for how we live, politics is really filling that role for many. And a really unusual thing has happened. Some people have become, quote, evangelicals, not because they're Christians, but because it's a political term. And so I find that to be just a fascinating thing to observe. And I know some people don't know what to do with evangelicals. When I first started coming to CCL and I told people I was a Christian, they said, "Well, you're not one of those evangelicals, are you?" I've learned to not really use that term because of the political baggage, but I share the beliefs. So, how do you deal with that? I don't know. I'm working on it. Uh, our trust in science, our trust in institutions has really ebbed. COVID contributed to that with the shutdowns and masks and going back and forth. But many evangelical leaders just say God is in control. He's in control of the earth. He's in control of the environment. And so we don't need to act on climate change. And whether or not they believe the science, they just say God is in control. And I find that to be, a little bit myopic or just a failure to deal with reality. But this last line I underline, sometimes if you accept climate change, you're seen as leaving the tribe. And so you end up getting strained friendships, lost friendships, and that sort of thing. And I can tell you about that from personal experience, depending on how much time we have. The Yale Climate page, they do some great work, and they have the 6 Americas. And I would encourage you to look at that. Just Google it. You can find it easily. Yale 6 Americas, and you'll find that. I've divided the world into these 5 different camps, and they correspond somewhat to the Yale, but I find this helps me to work with it. The Yale 6 Americas also helps to work with it. The denier, in my experience, denies the science, and this is similar to the dismissive in the Yale 6 Americas. And the denier just says the science isn't right. It's not really happening. Nothing here. And when you move a step away from that, you've got people who say, yes, there are climate problems going on. Climate science is real, but it's really not that bad. And it costs too much to do anything about it. Aren't China and India the ones? They're putting up more emissions than we are now, and U.S. has lowered emissions. And I don't know if any of y'all remember a magazine called Mad, and a character with a big smile and a goofy face, Alfred E. Newman, and he said, "What? Me worry?" Well, that's kind of how I classify the delayer. And the delayer category has really only popped up in the last few years. And I find it to be the most frustrating because these are people that really should be moving into the serious category, but they get caught up in something that slows them down, I think. And then the agnostic is somebody that, really hadn't figured it out yet. They don't know what they believe. And maybe they don't care. Maybe it's just not their issue today. I considered myself an agnostic until 2017 when I went to a conference at the Colorado School of Mines, which was presented by a group called the American Scientific Affiliation, which is a group of Christians who are scientists, theologians, and philosophers. And I had friends who were who were really deniers, and I had friends that were serious in my categories. And so working in faith and science, I tried to hear what the scientists had to say. And it was overwhelming, the evidence I heard. Catherine Hayhoe was there, and lots of people that aren't climate scientists, but in their field of specialization, they were dealing with it. So from 2017 on, I have considered myself to be what I call the serious category. This is a huge problem. We need to do something about it. It's getting worse. We need both mitigation, doing something about how we're adding to climate change, and we need to do adaptation, which is how we deal with it, because we're not going to undo it. It's going to continue to get worse. So how do we adapt? And we need to do it now. Now, the next step, and I'm concerned that sometimes the more apocalyptic side really turns people off, because if you're not tuned into climate science and you hear the world is going to end in fill in the blank, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, it can be a turnoff. So as far as the line between serious and apocalyptic, well, I'm on the apocalyptic side of serious, but I try to phrase it in a way that people don't get immediately turned off, that they'll engage with me, hopefully. And that's not always that easy, but that's the goal, have engagement. One of the issues that we face is that climate change is often seen as distant, that it really doesn't impact me. And this was discussed in the book Merchants of Doubt. And Merchants of Doubt's a good book to read if you want to understand some of the background about the hubris that's out there regarding climate change and the things that we're really working to overcome. So the evangelical world is generally politically conservative. And that's, again, in the old conservative sense of fiscal responsibility, strong military, all those pieces, being pro-life. So I think that fear is a big factor in not accepting some of the things that progressives would tend toward, including climate change science. So fear of change, loss of power, loss of a way of life, and fear overcomes both biblical faith and understanding science. So this is a part of what we see. Then evangelicals, I think values are really important. And some of the values for Christians are life, flourishing, our faith, purity, individual responsibility, and a fair market, and which would generally be considered a free market, a secure life, and keeping the status quo. So anything that rocks the status quo, I think, is a problem. Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind wrote about how people come to different conclusions about what's righteous, about what the good is, about values. And so this value-based messaging is something that we need to do for whatever group we're reaching or trying to reach, and making those values that we're emphasizing those that the group really values. So how do we do that? Well, these are some of the things that I think are good discussion starters. Health is always good. Climate change has negative health impacts. We look at heat, particularly heat helps to retain more pollutants. We're seeing in Texas, and I know I was glad to see just the East Coast to West Coast nature of this group. That's great. If I talk about Texas, it's just because that's where I am, and we could talk about your state too. But here in Texas, our 5 largest metropolitan statistical areas all have air quality issues that are growing and do not meet EPA requirements. Climate change isn't the only cause of that, but climate change is a contributing factor, what the military calls a threat multiplier. So health, pollution, asthma, things that are related, adaptation, building those seawalls, building roads that will withstand higher heat, building a grid that will give you electricity using clean energy and perform reliably both in hot weather and cold weather. That's a Texas issue, which a lot of you probably have read about. How do we have abundant life? What does it mean to have human flourishing? And how does climate change impact that? In our current life, how is climate change impacting the things that we see? For instance, water issues caused by glaciers melting. You'll hear me, I go back to glaciers because it's so straightforward that the loss of over 30% of the glacier mass in the world since the 1950s is a climate change issue. There's really nothing else that could point to that. When your glacier melts, and that's where you're getting the water for your ecosystem, for your farming, for your city, you run out of water late in summer and early fall. So that's a big issue. Extreme weather is picking up. And, again, thinking about Texas, Hurricane Harvey by attribution science was 10% stronger than it would have been without climate change and a warming Gulf of Mexico. Food production is impacted. Migration, because people leave their farms. If your farm's not productive, you got to go do something else. And we're seeing that. So children's health ties back to the health. But then we think about the long term. What about your children and grandchildren? What about 60 years from now? What is the world going to be like? And that's a big issue that we need to be thinking about. So in the conservative Christian evangelical community, these values of the tribe have really prevented a biblical understanding and a scientific understanding from being considered in a thorough and really reasoned manner. So for Christians, what does the Bible say? Well, in Genesis 1:26, we see that God creates the world and he makes man in his image. And making man in his image means that we have the capacity to do science. We have the capacity to take care of things. And he said, take care of my good creation. So there's a biblical mandate for man to take care of God's creation. In Colossians, it says that Jesus did the creating. And so he is the one that holds it all together. So it honors him to take care of creation. We want to think about the poor. How do we care for those that do not have a lot of assets, a lot of capability? And that's a part of Christian thought. It's the poor and disadvantaged who are being hardest hit. Those very people the Bible tells us to care for. Catherine Hayos is an evangelical Christian. You probably see her speak here and there. You know, she just seems to be everywhere. And she really gets this idea. Again, thinking about future generations. We want to prepare a world that will be livable and prepared for people to flourish. Now, being made in this image of God is a special thing that gives us the capacity to do science. We observe, we test. You know, science is not the enemy of faith. Faith tells us really how the world began. Science tells us how it works. That's a Christian view. And they should not be looked at as being in conflict, but rather as being complementary. So, you know, we can look at global warming, ocean acidity, pollution, and health. These all three tie together. And when we bring them together in dialogue, it can help us to understand and explain that greenhouse gas emissions and oil and gas spills are really contributing to these issues. We have multiple lines of evidence. The Keeling curve is really, you can show what's happened, that one of the arguments that's often made is that we're in natural cycles. Well, we've stepped out of those natural cycles. You know, the Keeling curve, we just had this up and down, and you just Google it if you haven't seen it. And you can see in the 800,000 year curve, it's doing the same thing. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, it goes off the chart. And this growth in greenhouse gases really can't do anything but increase temperature, no matter what else is going on. And that's been understood since the 1950s, excuse me, the 1850s. So this is old science. It's not something that's a left-wing method to take over the world by showing the science. There's an MIT primer that I'll reference. There's lots of things that you can look at, and I'll give you some resources. But this glacier mass melt off is a big one. So let's see, how come my slide's not moving here? Oh, there. Whoops! It starts moving. It moves too much. Okay. The impact of pollution. I mentioned all the things like autism, cancer, respiratory disease, all that's impacted by the pollution that we're talking about. Generally speaking, when you clean up the air, you're also fighting climate change. Now, some of the sulfates that we've taken out through getting cleaner trucks and getting cleaner ocean pollution have actually made climate change worse. But generally speaking, if we clean up the air, we're fighting climate change. There's a tremendous amount of impact on the poor. The loss of farmland I mentioned, the villages in just a wide array of places, from Louisiana to Alaska, El Salvador, Guatemala. All these places are damaged by what's going on with climate change. And so that's something that we need to bring into the conversation with evangelicals. In the U.S. and the Midwest, one year we get too much rain and they can't plant. Next year we have drought and their crops don't come out. In Texas, I think of cotton farmers particularly. There's a lot of irrigation here. The farmers that irrigate in 2021, they planted their crops, they irrigated, they were expecting rain. Heat came, rain didn't come, they lost a lot of money. Ranchers can't carry as many cattle on their land because there's less growth because of the combination of drought and heat. Glacier melt, the summer and fall water gets limited. The Alaskan fisheries close early because of the impact of climate change. And then corals, ocean acidity and heat are both damaging to corals. And so we need to bring them into the conversation, because over half the corals in the world are either dead or in duress. And then the ocean creatures that farm shells, like mollusks and Dungeness crab, are not farming those shells as well. And that's a major part of the food chain. So climate change is impacting the ocean food chain from the ground up. Those who are politically conservative, whether they're evangelicals or other types of conservative, they're interested in commerce, business, government debt, those kind of things. So catastrophic losses have to be paid for. They're insured. Insurance companies are strained. The U.S. Flood insurance program is strained. All these things are part of the story about climate change. Here in Texas, we pay more for property and casualty insurance because of Hurricane Harvey and other extreme weather. Our particular insurance program allows insurance companies to increase premiums to recoup their losses from extreme weather. So your state probably has something similar. Whether it does or not, if the insurance companies are strained because of increased losses, it's going to it's going to infect your premium. All right, it's going to impact the cost of your insurance, and if you're renting, it's going to impact the cost of your landlord, and that's going to impact your rent. So if sea level persists, rise persists, we're going to see homes not being insured. They're going to be defaults on loans. The government insurance is going to be paying out. And the government insurance program is one that really needs to be reworked, because there's no recognition that a house has been destroyed and you just reinsure it again. Before Hurricane Harvey, I read of a house that had been rebuilt 17 times on the government insurance program. Something's wrong with that program. So anyway, we're losing assets. That hurts tax revenue, and that hurts job creation. So some of the questions, some of the myths that come up, and there are long lists, and we can go through this another time, anytime you want. But if you get to a point where you're actually having good interaction with someone, these are some of the things that come up. You can't rely on the data. It's a left-wing plot. They're just trying to increase the role of government, take control of my thermostat, etc. Well, NOAA and NASA are considered the gold standard when it comes to measuring temperature in the world. And Scripps with the Keeling curve, they have great information that came out of the ice, glacier ice before 1959. And since 1959, they're monitoring CO2 levels on a minute-by-minute basis. And so you can see that at their website. Some Christians will tell you that, and conservatives, that human activity is just too insignificant to impact global climate patterns. And that's just simply not the case. As I think you wouldn't be on this call, I think, if you didn't think that. But that is a question that comes up, and the answer is simple: yes, we can. If you can fill up your garage with CO2, the Earth's just a little bit bigger, and it can be harmed too. So, greenhouse gas study has been going on since the mid-19th century, and it's not something new. And there was a woman in STEM who really did this first work. So ladies, if you're in STEM, I really want to encourage you, because we need more women to be comfortable being in STEM. But the work done in the 19th century was good, and it's only gotten better. Our projections are getting more and more down to small areas, and they were good in the 1980s. I saw a 2017 report that showed that there was a small, narrow band around actual results from those 1980s projections. And so we're doing better and better. So I think we have good understanding of that now. The CO2 is roughly 50% higher than the start of the Industrial Revolution. And you can see that again on the Keeling curve. And there's really nothing else that corresponds to the way we've seen temperature increase other than the CO2 level. The irradiation of the Earth by the sun, it hasn't increased in a corresponding manner. So you pretty much have CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gases that we can point to that are responsible. the temperature really is around 2 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the 1880s. And that's graphed, and we can see it continuing. This last hot summer that we had, it's going to be average, and we're going to be seeing worse summers. So that's a natural concern. It's the pattern that we've had for the last 800,000 years. We have busted out of it by the increase in CO2. The amount of temperature increase is having multiple impacts. I keep using glaciers because they're clearly defined. Katharine Hayhoe uses the term global weirding, and global weirding I like because all kinds of crazy stuff has happened. You know, who would think that the cold weather that we had in when we had Winter Storm Uri was really a result of the wind changing and the polar vortex breaking down, and all that cold air that should have been trapped up there coming down and freezing us in Texas of all places. Every county in Texas was under a freeze warning. And of course, we weren't prepared for that, and we had a lot of problems. But that's just typical, you know. And wildfires are a little bit more difficult because there are things that people say about wildfires, you know, that they weren't taken care of, the forests weren't taken care of. But you can always say, yes, that's true, they weren't taken care of. But it's also true that warming and drought contributed to it. An argument I like to make is that there are trusted messengers, people within the evangelical community that are concerned about climate change. Billy Graham has a great quote. He has a page I'd be glad to share with you. Billy Graham and John Stott started the Lausanne movement, which is a movement of Christian leaders from around the world. And I'm a member of their Creation Care Network. And you know, so we can point to people like Tim Keller, Alistair McGrath, N.T. Wright, Katharine Hayhoe, the Evangelical Environmental Network. All these groups that are Christians and individuals believe this way. The science faculties of these Christian colleges like Wheaton and Calvin, and the most conservative colleges like Texas A&M and Texas Tech and Hillsdale, they all see it the same way, as well as the best military or the best science universities in the world. And the U.S. military says that climate change is a threat multiplier. Jim Baker, George Shultz, Bob Inglis, these are people who have been in the political arena and are known. And then, of course, there's the 97% number on scientists, and all of the scientific associations have theirs. So my advice, if you get into a conversation, respect the dignity of the person you're engaged with in dialogue. Theology and science can lead the way for this tribe. Carbon and fee dividend plans are really not going to go anywhere until you overcome these other issues, because they just see it as another tax and a way to grow government. So be courageous, be steadfast, factual, respectful, and courteous. And whether it seems like it or not at the time, every conversation counts. You may not see the impact now, but the fruit, it could be there in the future. I have a list of resources. I'd be glad to share this, Stephanie. If you want to help me get this kind of thing out to people, I'd be glad to. But Caring for Creation by Mitch Hescock, Saving Us, The Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing by Katharine Hayhoe. Those are good. Billy Graham's one-pager has the quotes in it by him. And the National Association of Evangelicals has a booklet that you can download. And then there's some other resources here. So I thank you for your time. If you've got time for questions, I'm glad to take them. But again, if you take my email down, I'll be glad to interact with you.
Thank you so much, Larry. That was fantastic. Excuse me. There was a lot of helpful information there that I think will really help us when we speak to evangelicals going forward. Stephanie, you had a question, I think?
I did. I know we're really short on time, but given that, you know, this is the higher ed group, I'm already thinking about our elections work because it's going to expand beyond college students. But I'm wondering if there was, you know, just something really quick you might be able to say on if you see any generational differences in evangelicals, like the evangelicals that our students are interacting with on campus. Do they believe many of these similar myths? Are they quite as bought into kind of the political side of the faith, or are they primarily identifying as evangelical Christians as opposed to evangelical politics?
Well, that's a great question, Stephanie, and I should have mentioned that before. There is a group called the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, and Tori Goebel would be a great guest for y'all to have on. Tori's, I don't know, I don't guess women's ages. I just don't do that. I get in all kinds of trouble. But I think it's split, Stephanie. I really think that there is a greater concern among young evangelicals than their parents, and that causes some tension at Thanksgiving and Christmas, which we've just gone through. I've got a piece I can send you if you'd like called "How to Talk to Your Crazy Uncle at Thanksgiving," and of course I tell everybody in my family I am the crazy uncle. But anyway, it takes it just takes some patience, and over time I think we can turn it. But I do believe that young evangelicals are generally moving more than older evangelicals, but it just depends on their political situation too. If they are really caught up in make America great again, and that type of approach, Christian nationalism, then it's very difficult to move away from that, because that's leaving your tribe. So it's not a simple answer, but I'm more encouraged about the young evangelicals than I am about my peers.
Oh, thank you for that answer, Larry. I really appreciate it. Mabel, any final words you want to say just to wrap up our time with Larry before we move on?
Just that I want to thank Larry from the bottom of my heart for doing this and for being a great mentor. And also, just to kind of add to that, my outreach on campus speaks to exactly what you're just saying about young evangelicals. Concordia is a really small conservative Christian university, and there's a lot of people who fall within the spectrum of what you were talking about earlier on. And yeah, it depends on the person, but the more you talk about it, the more you plant the seed. And I'm glad you put that in your slide, Larry. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I just emphasize, anybody who wants to be in contact, I'm passionate about this, and I'm glad to be of help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. And now I'm really excited to move on to the campaign updates of the evening, and I'll hand it over to Emily to get us started with CFD updates.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you, Larry. So some national updates for the CFD movement are just, if you're interested in helping out with strategizing nationally, the CFD National Strategy Chat is in the Slack, where we're kind of continuing to think about the direction. Shout out Sadie for joining that recently. And because one of the things that we've been discussing is if we should switch back to the bit.ly link instead of the cclusa.org short link. So stuff like that, we're kind of deciding in that chat. And then Philip, I wonder if, I think we might have touched on this at a meeting before, but do you want to share about the meeting with the Volo Foundation on the 10th? Yeah, so. Okay. Well, we might have mentioned this in an earlier call, but we're going to be meeting with the Volo Foundation, which is this kind of donor or organization who's trying to build this network of all these different groups advocating for carbon pricing, and we're hoping to tap into that network, and they may be able to support us with resources, and for the new year, it might be really cool with the CFD Movement National Instagram. We've been kind of doing a lot of Instagram reels. So if any of you guys are very Instagram social media savvy, this would be really cool to start breaking into that, and we can do collaborative posts and make it really dynamic. So there's also a social media channel in the Slack to work and collaborate on that. One big thing is out of Elcoy. We announced this last heat call, but it's more clear now that, so there's something called the Youth Climate Policy Council, which is a bunch of representatives from different groups are going to come together and decide on what, oh yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, fantastic, Sadie. That's so awesome. So all these different representatives from all these different youth climate organizations are going to come together to, I guess, vote on what initiatives they want to spotlight. So, for example, they are choosing a national policy or an international policy. And so this, of course, would be a fantastic place to recommend advocating for the carbon fee and dividend as a spotlight policy. And so originally we thought maybe we could only have 2 representatives from CCL, but it's actually the case that there can be 2 representatives from any local group, like any chapter. So for example, if at Bowdoin, like Catherine, if you wanted to be a representative for Bowdoin College for the Youth Climate Policy Council, then you could be a representative. So because it's a democratic vote, the more representation we have, the better. So I put the application link in this sheet, and I think they're closing the application. They're starting to look through the application. So if you're able to apply tonight, or just really as soon as possible, that would be really great. And I don't know how often they're meeting, but just if we kind of like have as many names in the bucket, that would be really great. So definitely encourage anyone to apply to that. It's a very quick application too. And I don't think it's like a necessarily a strong, like if you apply, then you're super committed. We'll kind of see. I think they're figuring out the structure as they go too. And also more information is on the higher link. And just an update for if anyone wants to get involved with the CFD movement. Stephanie and I were talking about this earlier about orientation calls. They used to be at they're still going to be at the same time on the first and third Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, but we're just going to switch the link so that there aren't multiple links. So the orientation calls will be on this heat call link. So if anyone wants to join, then that's the link to direct them to. And then Stephanie, do you want to announce the resources?
Sure. So I'm really excited to share. We always know resources are a major limiting factor, and we are really committing to growing the CFD movement this year. So we have some amazing resources available to you for free for anybody who wants to get involved in the CFD movement. So if you've already been involved, you can apply for some stickers or some gift cards, some virtual gift cards, so they will get to you instantly once you apply and your application is reviewed and selected. If you've never been involved in the CFD movement before and you've been waiting for a good time, now is the best possible time. So in the action sheet, there is a Google form where you can apply for those opportunities. It is a limited quantity, and 1,000 stickers will go really quickly, I'm sure. But there's some more details in the application link. So I really encourage any of you who are interested to go ahead and fill that out. Perfect. The gift card is for whatever expenses you incur in participating in the movement. So if you needed to, for example, print out some signs, if you needed to buy cardstock, if you needed to buy Sharpies, whatever it might be, not all of our CFD movement leaders are campus chapters. So like if you're a campus chapter, you often get student org funding that CFD movement leaders don't always have access to. So we want to prioritize those folks who don't have another means of accessing funding. Okay, perfect. And yes, as Stanley said, who made the forms? Thank you, Stanley. There is a box in the application where you'll explain what you need the funding for. So we will keep that in mind as we make our selections, because we only have 9 gift cards and we want to make the money go as far as we can. So other updates, unless Emily, was there anything else on the CFD side that you wanted to share?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. So strap in, y'all, because this is going to be a heck of a year. It's going to be really, really busy. And we are starting off January when hopefully you have the most motivation based on all those great nudge words that you shared at the beginning, and really hitting the ground running. So the first thing is that we are going all in on elections this year. Obviously, kind of a big deal in the US. We have elections happening all across federal all the way down to local levels. So of course we are a nonpartisan organization, so we're going to put our CCL spin on it, and we're going to adopt something called relational organizing and deep canvassing tactics, which really lean into our relationships with each other. So if you have no idea what those words are and you want to learn more about what they mean and how we're going to be using them, I invite you all to join our very first training, our kickoff training, which is next week. We're going to be learning more about relational organizing first, and our plan is to kind of roll this out as a sequence of trainings, one training in January, one in February, and one in March. And then by March, hopefully in time for some of the most important primaries, we will have a campaign up and running. But that's why it's super important that you get involved as soon as possible, so that you can start sort of getting up to speed and recruiting more people to join. Other announcements that are going on, other events. This weekend is the CCL national call, or international call might be more accurate. I just put a little preview in the action sheet. There's this great little graphic. That is one of the things that will be discussed on the action call. And I think you all are gonna love it. We just got a preview this morning on our staff call. And I think it's gonna really help kind of make sense of how our policy agenda is going to be leveraged at different times throughout the year. And of course, it also includes some reminders of some major CCL events, like our June conference. A couple more announcements. Internship applications are open. Please apply. Deadline is February 15th. You can apply at cclusa.org/intern and learn more about the positions that are available. Shout out to our current interns and incoming interns who are on this call. Y'all are amazing and literally like such a huge part of why I love my job. We still have World's Littlest Climate books available. I've been offering these since fall. Please get the box of World's Littlest Climate books off of my kitchen floor. It's a little hard to work around. There are still so many. So in the action sheet, there is a link to the form where you can submit a request for up to 10 of these at a time. I'm happy to send out more of them if they're still not moving, but they're a really great resource. Give them away to your leadership team, give them away to that faculty advisor you're trying to recruit, whatever you need it for. And the last opportunity I really want to raise, especially for folks who are thinking about starting organizing on campus. Thank God, I would be hopelessly lost if it were any bigger than this, because there's still like 60. So if you're planning to start organizing this semester and don't necessarily have like a core group of people to start with, last in the fall, I spoke to you a little bit about this program called The Week. It's a week-long series of short 1-hour documentaries, 3 of them, that you embark upon with a group of hopefully friends, but maybe strangers, that go over climate change, what's happening, how we got here, and how we're going to get ourselves out of it. It's going to be a really great recruitment tool. If you're looking to build up membership, you might consider hosting one of these and throwing some pizza nights or bringing popcorn, whatever it might be. Get cozy when it's too cold to do anything else outside, for those of you in winter wonderlands right now. If you are interested in that, please email me, DM me on Slack, whatever it might be. I would love to talk to you more about how you can bring it. It's completely free, and you can bring it to your school. So that was a huge amount of information. It doesn't leave us a whole lot of time to be in breakout rooms and strategizing and discussing, but as is our practice, this line will stay open for at least another 30 minutes. So if folks want to hang out, I'm just going to stop the recording. Say once again, thank you to everybody who's come out tonight, especially to Larry for speaking to our group. But if anybody would like to hang out a little bit longer, ask questions on any of these campaign updates, because there were so gosh dang many, please feel free to do that. And there's a ton more events listed in the action sheet that are coming up. So see where you're going to plug in January, and let's start 2024 off strong. Thanks for being here.